There was a time when Brooklyn was known more for its factories than its fromageries, when you were more likely to find a hard hat here than a hipster. That time has passed, but manufacturing is making something of a comeback in the borough. Brooklyn reported more manufacturing jobs last year than it had since 2008, although the sector is still about half the size it was at the turn of this century. Mayor de Blasio last week announced new steps to try to encourage more growth in the city's industrial sector. But when it comes to government helping industry, this borough has in the past seen both policy success and failure. So what industrial future will Bill de Blasio manufacture for us? Let's ask our guests. I'm happy to have with me Leah Archibald, Executive Director of Evergreen, the North Brooklyn Business Exchange. Welcome, Leah.
Thanks.
Lisa Futterman, the New York City representative of the Workforce Development Institute. Hello, Lisa.
Hello.
And Jonathan Bowles, Executive Director of the Center for an Urban Future. Thanks for coming on, John. Hello. So industrial manufacturing, these terms are thrown around a lot. What kind of work are we talking about?
Okay, so obviously manufacturing, right, which is the production of something, taking a raw material and doing something to it to make something else. But for the purposes of the city's term, industrial, that's a little broader than just manufacturing. That includes transportation, utilities, warehouse distribution, and some construction trades. So it's a slightly broader umbrella than just straight up manufacturing. But they have the common need to have manufacturing land to get their work done.
And so we hear a lot about the value placed on those jobs, Lisa, and why do we like that kind of employment? Why do we talk about manufacturing industrial work more than, say, service sector work? What's valuable about it?
Manufacturing jobs are actually good jobs. They often pay a higher wage, significantly above the minimum wage. So, it's been a sector that's been a good one for people who need to support their families, be able to live in New York City. So it's a really important sector to support, and also the history of products being made here. And I think there is a resurgence in people being interested in knowing how their products are made and knowing that they're made locally and sustainably in many cases.
John, we've been talking about manufacturing in Brooklyn and in the city for decades, how to buff it up, how to bring it back. How do you describe the current state of that sector and kind of how we got to there?
Well, I think it's good and bad. I think that, as you mentioned at the outset, there have been years and years of losses, but I think right now, for the first time in a long time, we're seeing real momentum in manufacturing. We're seeing real opportunity. From the Navy Yard to Industry City to East New York, we're seeing lots and lots of entrepreneurial manufacturing, new guys and women starting businesses, growing businesses. There's kind of a back to local movement, so I think that we're seeing people look for specialty food, all sorts of things that are being made now. For the first time in probably decades, manufacturing is sexy again, and with that, there's some real growth happening. It's still small-scale growth, but citywide for 10 years before 2009 or so, we saw about 10,000 jobs lost in manufacturing a year. The same proportionally, Brooklyn was seeing the same kind of losses. But since then, it's been flat or even a little bit higher in terms of job growth. And I think the real opportunity is, can we take some of these new small-scale manufacturing companies in Brooklyn and get them to be mid-sized manufacturing companies?
Let's talk about scale some more, because that's important, right? When we think manufacturing, we think of the factory, hundreds of workers going in, the whistle sounding, people punching in their time cards. That's not really what manufacturing looks like in the city today, is it?
It's a bit bifurcated, right? So we've got our legacy manufacturers that still have many dozens or even hundreds of employees. Those are the multi-generational firms that are still here, that still have a competitive advantage in the city. But we're definitely seeing an increase in the number of much smaller manufacturing businesses, particularly in food production. They're much lower in employment. Like 25 employees would be a very large entrepreneurial food manufacturer, and frequently it's just a handful, but there are more and more of them. And as these small food firms are poised for explosive growth, we think there's a real opportunity to create some more high-quality working-class jobs. Our organization works with businesses throughout North Brooklyn, and a few years ago we noticed such an increase in the amount of requests for service service from small food manufacturers, these entrepreneurial startups. We actually developed a whole line of programming for them that we've just recently been able to expand, and it's been very successful. There are hundreds of small food manufacturers that are interested in getting business support help.
Lisa, you mentioned the idea, and I think people talk about it a lot, that these kind of jobs are good jobs. They offer a middle-class future to people who don't necessarily have a very deep education. Is that true across manufacturing, or kind of does it depend what sort of job you get?
I mean, in the food industry is one, that Leah just mentioned. The wages do tend to be lower in that field, but I think that we have work to do with these newer manufacturers in helping them understand that, first of all, they're not going to compete, with home health aid jobs that pay a higher wage if they want to get people in to their factories. And we are hearing about companies having a hard time finding employees. So I think part of what we have to do is work with these companies to provide support to them so that they can have an understanding of, what are the wages that they need to pay today. But that is one where I think they need some help. And just a short example, I recently spoke with a Brooklyn-based food manufacturer that's a new and growing company that's very ethically focused. In fact, they're interested in hiring people who are formerly incarcerated, and they're actually getting together with other local food manufacturers to figure out, okay, what are these extra training needs that these folks might need, and then there are supports for that. My organization in particular, the Workforce Development Institute, provides grants that can help manufacturers employ people, and so that's something where, particularly where there are multiple employers that have the same sort of training need, and there's a pool of people that has a barrier to employment, that's a willing and able workforce that maybe just needs that extra bit of training in order to be able to fill some of those jobs.
So manufacturing has made its way into the presidential campaign, the debate stage. We know that Bernie Sanders not so hot on the NAFTA, Donald Trump not so hot on a lot of things. But so those challenges affect companies across the country. But locally, what are the challenges that face manufacturers here in the city, unique to the city? John, I know you've done a lot of research on that.
Right. Well, a lot of it comes down to space. I mean, manufacturers are not the kind of business where you just need a room, plug in a computer. Usually you're making something. You need room for equipment. You need room for employees if you're going to grow. And you also need specially zoned land. Manufacturers have to be in a manufacturing zone. And so usually those are areas that are not right next to or in the middle of a lot of residential buildings. And so, the biggest challenge is manufacturing space has really been disappearing. And it's partly because the number of manufacturing companies has gone down significantly in recent years. And so part of that's a good thing, but a lot of the manufacturers that are now looking to grow, they're finding it really hard to find that space, and the space that is available is exorbitantly expensive. It's growing in price, and so that's the biggest challenge today.
And that's one of the challenges that the mayor and his administration has said that they intend to try to address. What have they done so far? What do we think?
Well, we're actually getting to meet with them Friday afternoon, so I'll let you know once we chat with them. But one of the things that the mayor stated in his press conference last fall that he was going to do would be to tie up some of the loopholes in the current manufacturing zoning. Right now, mini storage, hotels are all legal as of right uses in manufacturing areas. Obviously, those are uses that can pay so much more per square foot than manufacturers can. So their proliferation drives up the price of manufacturing space for our actual manufacturers, frequently way beyond what they can afford and still make their product. So the mayor has promised to do that. I think that they're working on exactly how that's going to work, but that's one of the interventions that they've mentioned, and it would be very helpful. I mean, again, we work in North Brooklyn, so if you've ever visited our Greenpoint Williamsburg Industrial Business Zone, you would note that there are 250-foot-tall, gigantic hotels being built. There are gigantic nightclubs and other large-scale amusements. The Gowanus is a similar situation. And these are all legal as of right uses who can afford a lot more than manufacturers can. So if there was some attempt to limit some of these, it would provide a bit of a cooling effect on the rampant real estate prices.
But the other end of it, the workforce end, employers in the manufacturing industry looking for workers in the city, are they finding the skills they need, or are we going to have jobs here that end up going to people who live outside the 5 boroughs?
We need to train people for some of the jobs that are open and available. There is support from the city through their customized training program, but employers, they have to have at least 10 employees to take part in that. So for some companies that are a little bit smaller and trying to grow, they're not able to access that, but it is an excellent resource. So in some cases there are, other supports. The industrial business zones and the managers of those, like Leah's organizations, are really important that those organizations are continued to be funded to help those companies access things like training, and oftentimes you connect people, to positions as well. My organization can step in and, in some cases, match them to workforce development organizations that have contracts through the city or through private foundations to deliver workforce support, workforce development and training to job seekers. Sometimes it's a case of connecting those manufacturers with those often nonprofit organizations that have the potential talent.
One of the things we're working on with the small food manufacturers is, we found that a lot of these startups, they're employing their friends, and they haven't really moved into, linking their job opportunities to the local workforce. So we found that as an opportunity. Yeah. So we've been doing just that, kind of convening meetup events with small food manufacturers with workforce development partners like the Brooklyn Chamber and the Workforce One Centers and the HOPE program and Opportunities for a Better Tomorrow and St. Nick's, so that we can start to forge these relationships to make sure that as job opportunities come up, they're going to folks in the local community.
Just to add something quick, just a lot of the more established manufacturers, 30, even 40 years ago, they may have hired people from a specific immigrant population, and so for a long time, referrals came from that workforce. And now a lot of those employers are reporting that, the children of those immigrants no longer want to go work in a factory. They're on a path toward college. And I was just in a factory that employed mostly Chinese workers in the garment center, in fact. And they have a dilemma because the main language spoken is Mandarin in their factory. And no new immigrants from China want to go and work there. They're headed toward a path of college. So they really need to rethink their strategy of bringing on employees. Sometimes ESL is really important to help that workforce be able to communicate with people that are speaking other languages.
So this conversation is kind of bleeding into the one about the mayor's housing plan, rezonings that's come up in East New York, where there's a bid to change some of the manufacturing zoning to residential or mixed use. In Jerome Avenue, there are a lot of not manufacturing but industrial businesses, there's blue-collar businesses that might go the way of the dodo. Do you think that the city needs to preserve those spaces for that kind of work, or does it make sense to move manufacturing and industrial work to IBZs and kind of dedicated zones? What do you think, John?
I think we need both. Look, we have a growing population, a record population right now in New York City. If we're going to keep that going, we've got to have jobs for it. We've got to have spaces for people to work. Also, the mayor has talked a lot about attacking inequality. I give him a lot of credit for doing that. But it's got to be more than just affordable housing, which is important. But we also need affordable places for people to work, for companies to be able to grow. So we need to have those middle class, those mobility jobs, those opportunities for people that don't have a college degree to get employment and for those kind of companies to grow. So even if it's not manufacturing companies, because manufacturing is doing pretty well right now, but it's not necessarily one of the growing sectors of our economy right now. We need commercial spaces for growing companies. I hope manufacturing is part of that, but we need jobs, period. And so I think that there needs to be a good mix between the affordable housing and preserving some spaces in those communities for commercial uses.
Yeah. Because there is an argument about our recent history that manufacturing has been kind of fetishized, that in fact people have been slow to wake up to the fact that it has left the city and it's really not going to come back. Is there a danger that we are sort of too concerned with preserving manufacturing and not other potential middle class jobs?
Not on my part. You know, like I always say, no housing is affordable without a job. And the jobs that manufacturing provide have low barriers to entry. They don't require proficiency in English. They don't require high levels of educational attainment. They're a great first step on the ladder of social mobility. They traditionally have been in New York City and continue to fulfill that role. And you know, I see where you're going, you know, with the fetishization of production stuff. But there are still thousands, and Jonathan can give you the real numbers. There are still thousands and thousands of New York City families depend on these jobs. It's not just, you know, specialty mayonnaise, right? Like, they're really making stuff that you consume every day.
We'll have to see how your meeting goes Friday, but thank you all so much for coming and talking about this important issue.